And we are live. Good to have you, Tula. Good to see you, buddy. Where are you now?
I am in Troy, Michigan, about 15 miles outside of Detroit City proper. So,
Oh, awesome. Awesome to have you, Daniel. You're on board as well. We both are based in Munich. How are you doing, Daniel?
Yeah, great. It's so great to see you, Tula. And it was exciting to see you face to face last week here in Munich.
yeah, that was such a fun time, wasn't it? I think
Yeah, awesome. And thanks
having
for
that
inviting us.
back trip of Carwell.
This was your event. It was the Carwow event, and that's where we met. And so for the viewers, maybe sort of a little just to give it away, we all old Beijingers. We've known each other for a long, long time. Have some really old Beijing friends that we share in common. And so good to see you in town. And I think this is really sort of the reason why we thought we're gonna hook up with you, Tula. You spent quite a bit of time here at the IAA Mobility Fair in Munich, and so did Daniel, and me as well, a little bit. And so, sort of sharing a little bit, what were the takeaways? What did we see? What did we learn? What did we hear? And so, here, let me start with this question for both of you. Just imagine you are running The Economist, and the cover is yours. So, what would be sort of your suggestion for a very sort of clickbaity title? As like, what was this whole thing in Munich all about? Oh my God! So why don't you both sort of try to take a quick stab at it? What would be your title for The Economist addressing that whole ERR thing in Munich?
So before we answer that, I still wanted to mention, right? Like Tula is running this very cool channel, the Sino Auto Insights. I think it's an amazing channel talking about Chinese EVs. Very cool. And it's really great. I mean, we are trying to do a little bit something like similar about China here from the European side. That's really cool. What's your take on this headline? Huh? What's your headline?
So clickbaity. I would have an EV on the cover with the Chinese flag on the front door, and maybe say. We come in peace, and I think that would be a pretty good start to the magazine.
And we come in peace.
Yeah. So I think because the reality is, with the European Union looking at 2035, the UK looking at 2030, I just don't think there's going to be enough product, especially at the low end, to really get to that. Those years without a lot of help from China EV Inc. And I think that, and Daniel, you know this very well, the quality, reliability, the design, the software is all competitive, globally competitive. So that should not be a concern for German consumers, Italian consumers, French consumers, Spanish consumers. And ultimately, we all work hard for the euros or the US dollars that we make. And so hopefully they have the opportunity to kind of choose without being limited by what they can purchase because the Chinese vehicles aren't in the market. So
awesome. Daniel, what's your cover design?
Yeah, it's funny because I had an interview last week with a Swiss television station, and it was quite a long interview, and they just picked out the one sentence from me where I basically said, I mean, it's the truth, right? Like, I mean, you were polite right now on the Germans, Tula, right? But I said basically this industry more than 100 years old. German companies used to have the lead for all these 100 years in this industry. But unfortunately, if you take a look right now, the leadership has become a follower role, right? So I don't know how to put that to a headline, but I think it's. I mean, you can discuss if the lead is already with the Chinese or with Tesla, but unfortunately, I have to say that the Germans are not driving this industry forward anymore, right? I mean, more in a reaction mode. Huh? But I agree with you.
I think emergency reaction mode too, not just, I think 4 or 5 years ago, they were starting to react, but now because of the transactions between Volkswagen and XPeng, between Audi and SAIC, you see that they're all looking at make or buy decisions. And the make decision is way too long from a from a lead time standpoint in order to be competitive with a Tesla and China EV Inc. And so they're looking at buying their way into competitiveness in the short term, at least. So
yeah, I think you're very right. That's a very good example, right? I mean, I think it's a great decision, this deal, right? Like the Xiaopeng Volkswagen deal. But I think both of these companies are with the back to the wall, because Volkswagen can't sell any EVs anymore in China. And Xiaopeng has great products, but they haven't reached the scale yet. So the price war in China is squeezing them, right? So imagine a deal like this would have happened 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, when I was at Byton, if we would have had a deal like this, right, it would have made a big difference for us.
Yes.
I would quickly want to come back to the fair, because, I mean, obviously you guys are very familiar with the format. It used to be in Frankfurt, it's now in Munich. What is the one thing, I mean, for the people in like the viewers today that haven't been, what is the one thing that really sticks out when you guys sort of think back to last week, the things you've seen, maybe some of the brands? Is there something that's been really memorable? It doesn't even have to be maybe at the fair. As everybody knows, downtown Munich was also packed with pop-up stores by all these different brands. So is there something that really you feel like you want to share because it's very memorable?
So let me start. Let me give you my impressions of IAA Munich. First, Munich, what a great city. The weather was amazing. I heard it's always like that in Munich, so I'm definitely going to come back. I was having gone to the Detroit Auto Show last year and being pretty disappointed. I was very pleasantly surprised. I thought it was a well-run event, and I thought that having Munich as the backdrop was very appropriate. And the other big impression from IAA was not only the number of Chinese companies at IAA, but the diversity of those companies. So there are EV companies like BYD, Leap Motor, Avatar, but there are also autonomous vehicle companies, QCraft, Deep Route. There were LiDAR companies, Hesai, RoboSense, chip companies, Horizon, Black Sesame, and then the battery companies, of course, CATL, Eve, and Sunwata. So not only was there a lot of Chinese companies, but they brought a diversity of skills, products, and expertise. So I think that really stood out. And finally, the one thing that stood out to me was that zoom out picture of the BYD presser. That was 4, 5, 6 people deep. The interest in BYD is undeniable in Germany. So,
interesting. Daniel, on your part?
Yeah, so I agree, right? Like this is a good format, and I mean, all of us, like Tula and me, probably went to motor shows for more than 20 years. Every year, it got a bit boring and annoying, right? It's always the same, and so on. So this is something innovative. I like it. I think they did a good job. So that to split it up, just outside there is more for the special automotive industry guys, and then in the downtown city, it felt a little bit like a party for normal consumers. So I like it. It's really good, and of course we had good weather, so not bad. And then my second impression was, I mean, now the S curve of technology disruption, right, is coming up. But still, we see so many people who are not getting the point. I mean, we still have discussions, people who not want to be all in on electric mobility or promote e-fuels and these kind of things. That's a bit strange. Like you feel already now this is changing. And for me personally, the highlight was because we also took part with our new startup, with Noyo. So we were not official part of IAA, but we were in this premium shopping mall downtown in Pfeifhof, and we displayed the premium brand car, the Voya Free from Dongfeng. So, and that was amazing, because, in Germany, right, like everyone likes cars, and we had so many people walking by, and then they catch this, and then just ordinary people, right? And then they say, oh, Chinese car, and I say, oh, Chinese car, what is this? And then they sit in the car, you see the face, you see the eyes, and no, this cannot be. I mean, this kind of shock, I mean, that is symptomatic, right? I mean, impossible to imagine, Imagine 5 years ago when we were all in Beijing, or 10 years ago. If someone would have told us that in 2023 we go to Europe, we're going to start selling Chinese premium cars to Germany. Impossible to imagine, right? That's amazing.
I had those same expressions from the European executives from the Shanghai Auto Show in April, but they were more scared than kind of shocked. They were like, "Oh my God, they've caught up to us, and they're going to beat us on a lot of levels." And to your point, Daniel, I thought those conversations and debates between people about the move to EVs, because whether you like EVs or not, all of the legacies are all in. They've invested or announced investments, huge investments in the transition. It's a when, not an if. So that I thought that debate was over. But in speaking with some folks in Munich, we over some beer, of course, we had some vigorous debates about the merits of an electric vehicle for the European market. And so it's still something that's a bit controversial, and it shouldn't be anymore. So,
I mean, Daniel, if I sort of chime in here at this point with another question, but right on this point, and I think we debated this before, but since we're all here together today, I'd like to sort of hear your take on this. How come? Obviously, we can always point back to COVID, 3 years almost of a lockdown and incommunicado, very little travel between the continents. And so, the Chinese sort of developed during that time. But at the same time, as you just mentioned, Tula, all the German big OEM brands are in China with big teams in China. There's so many German expats from these automotive companies there. I mean, the surprise in April, and now even exacerbated by the IAA here in Munich, how can that happen that we now pretend we're surprised while we're there all the time and basically on site watching what's unfolding but not seeing it? It's like 视而不见 in Chinese, right? When you look at something but you just don't see it. I mean, what's your take on that point?
Yeah, so I think, of course, for us, it wasn't a surprise. Like I mean, in 2017, 18, these first cars were coming out from NIO, Xiaopeng, Byton, and then also the other companies. So you could have expected that by 2023, there would be a bunch of very, very competitive Chinese cars. So why did the German companies obviously miss the train or not do enough, right? It's a big question. So it's always hard to answer. I think it's wrong judgment and a little bit of arrogance and ignorance, unfortunately, because all these German companies, they're still making big money and in the bottom line, still very successful. Yeah? Between developing new cars and starting to sell them, it's a 4 or 5 years time lag. So I think, not everyone, I mean, Mirko, like this, right? And who 5 years ago, if you would have picked any German automotive executive and say, let's make a bet, okay? We bet 1 million euro that in 2022, Tesla Model Y is going to be the best sold car in Europe and in Germany. I not say electric car, the most sold car. Right? You could have easily find someone to take that bet. Yeah?
Right.
Impossible to imagine. Yeah?
There would be a line of people that wanted to take that bet. There would be a line of people that want to take that bet.
So completely underestimated this. Yeah. So to be honest, I would have also not guessed that. I mean, of course, I would have been much more optimistic than maybe other guys, but it's exceeded expectation. And unfortunately, I think, I think the German companies haven't really found their role in this. Yeah, they were doing it, but they were driven. But they didn't want to be all in on this. They didn't dare to be very bold and go all in on this. And then also very important, I think a good industry policy is missing in Europe. Yeah? Because in China, I mean, just starting to build electric cars doesn't work if you don't get a good supply chain on the battery side, right? And the government in China, you have to admit they did a good industry policy in building up companies like CATL and so on. In Europe, I mean, everyone is trying now to do the gigafactories and everyone talked about this at IAA, but it takes time, right? Like the whole supply chain, the raw materials and so on. And Europe is not going to be able in the very short term to produce a cost competitive battery. That's a challenge. I don't know. What's your take on this, Tula? I mean, from the outside.
Well, I think that the United States was smart to put the Inflation Reduction Act in place, and I'm a bit fearful for my friends in Europe about what they're going to do, or if they're going to do anything, or if you're going to do anything with regards to that, because 90% of all EVs sold in China last year were under 300,000 RMB, or about $45,000. And so there's going to be a huge number of vehicles from China that are going to be exported to Europe. I think it creates a huge opportunity, but it creates a lot of pressure on the legacy side. And let me point back to the World New Energy Vehicle Congress, which was for the first time held outside of China. And it had all the major players. The CEO, Zipsa, was there. Kalenius was there. And they all presented. Wang Chuanfu was there. Li Bin was there. And Wang Gang, the godfather of the Chinese electric vehicle. But Bluma was the first foreign industry leader to present. And to your point, Mirko, why people still don't get it is in his second slide, he said, we are in a strong position in China. He was referring to the Volkswagen Group. He said that in his second slide, but he kind of transitioned into this reality at the very end of his speech. He said that China is a fitness center for Volkswagen Group, and he said that we have to work hard to keep up. And I think that's very true. You know, Ralph Brandstatter, he said like 5 or 6 Chinese words or statements, and everybody was cheering, right? Like 中国速度, right? Like, and so that's real. China's speed is real. So they were caught flat-footed because China is fast, because Tesla is fast. And Daniel, I'm sure it took you a little bit of time when you started biting to know that in a digital world, things just move so much faster. And whereas product updates and feature and bug fixes, they don't take a year-long engineering change like they do in a traditional automotive space. They take 2 weeks of software developers and quality guys to fix the bug and then send out that patch over the air. Okay. And I think that traditional automotive leadership have a very, very difficult time of thinking between capital expenditures and operating expenses. And so in the tech world, everything is an OpEx because manufacturing is outsourced. And so philosophically, how we think about the traditional automotive sector and the high-tech sector is completely different. And I don't know if many of the current leadership at some of these traditional automotive companies and these tier ones are capable of getting their minds around how fast things are moving. So
I think I fully agree with you, Tula. I mean, being convinced that it's very difficult for the traditional incumbents to change the mindset to a digital mindset, to a tech mindset, was the reason we founded Byton, right? So we thought, because these big ships, it's too hard for them to transform. We thought there's a chance, right? But you are very polite on us Germans, right? I mean, the fact is that the German brands really in China, they get beaten up very bad. I mean, in the EV part, right? Like what you said from Volkswagen, they used to have 25% or more of the market. They got overtaken by BYD, and in the EVs, I think they sell 1 or 2% now, right? So Chinese are just not buying their cars. And
Daniel, may I add, they needed to cut prices in order to get that 1 or 2%. So
yeah, right. So it's only with price cuts. And in the premium segment, where BMW, Audi, Mercedes used to have 2/3 of the market, right? Like they dominate the market. Huh? But right now, adding the new premium brands, Li Auto and Neo and so on into the mix, right? Like the 3 German brands in the EV part of the premium, they have only 10% together. So it's really very scary. So Tule, what do you think? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? What happens in China, will it stay in China?
I think that, and you both know this, so I'm not telling you anything surprising, but Europe and the United States cannot build a affordable, profitable electric vehicle without at least Chinese batteries. And so I think that's an important distinction that needs to be made, because there's a lot of rhetoric about de-risking and taking out the China supply chain, but through 2030, it will be impossible. I know that Europe is also looking at some investments in, and this is the difference between the United States and Europe, I think, because of the Inflation Reduction Act. There are direct investments that aren't as controversial from Chinese companies into Europe as there are in the United States. But I think that's awesome. I think, because we have to separate the politics from the business. And if Volkswagen and even the French companies from Stellantis, the Renaults, the Citroens, if they want to build affordable cars, they need to maintain those supply chains with China. And so I'm excited. I don't want to dwell on the negative side and the challenges ahead because, Daniel, you work at a startup. I help startups. I think the opportunities for these startups, these disruptors, is tremendous. It's huge. And I'd rather focus on. These 2 points I would love your thoughts on. So, because car companies, whether they're German, American, French, they're the best marketers in the world because for 100 years, they convinced us to spend 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and in your case, working at BMW, 80, 90,000 euro on their product that we use 5% of the time. Okay. They convinced us that's a prudent investment. Right. And so, these Chinese EV companies are kind of, this is their comeuppance a little bit. Right. And, some of the challenges that I think that Germany and Europe are having, again, looking at the glass is half full, which creates opportunities, is just the software development capabilities. One of the questions that I give, because we all lived in Beijing, so we knew a lot of German executives in the automotive space, and up until probably 24, 30 months ago, they were all in denial. And I would ask them, even if you could build an affordable EV, how do you build out the tech? How do you build out the stack? And I said, name me 5 Chinese tech companies that are globally relevant. No problem, right? Alibaba, Tencent. And name me 5 American. No problem. Apple, Google, Amazon. Now, name me 5 German tech companies that are globally relevant. And I would give them one, SAP.
Or even right? European, right? Like even European. Not German.
So I think that creates that challenge, right? And so, but, it also creates opportunities for aspiring folks that want to build something new. So
let's assume, you guys have sort of very rich background in cars, and you just mentioned this presentation slide there, right? So this sort of denial is very obvious. But if you were both hired, right, by these German car companies to really think about how to survive, first of all, in the Chinese market as well, but then obviously internationally as well, because the Chinese are now coming to the last corners of the earth. What is, and I know, Daniel, you mentioned this earlier, you had a couple of conversations with some of these leaders of German companies in China. So what do you guys think would be the best strategy forward? We've seen a little bit what Volkswagen did there with Xiaopeng and Audi with SAIC, but what are the moves that they have available to themselves to really think about and then possibly pursue?
Yeah, I think obviously it's already crisis mode in my view. It's a bit late, right? 5 years ago there would have been enough time to do it in a normal way, but now I think it must be quite radical steering against it. So firstly, I think you have to be all in on this. The next decade, I'm convinced it's going to be the EV decade. The electric S-curve is going to come up, so don't hesitate. Be all in on it. And obviously right now, what Tule just said, on the tech side, this is a major challenge. Up until now, the German cars, the UI, UX, it's just far behind. Even Tesla and for sure some of the Chinese cars. So how to change this? I think the only way to do it is to support innovation in terms of making small spin-off startups under these corporates. It doesn't work in a big organization because these big organizations, they are big ships They're killing innovation. Yeah, the big organizations, they kill innovation before the good ideas get killed and shut down with a shotgun. It cannot work. Yeah, so you need to create small spin-off and startups, and you have this culture issue, right? Like you have the mechanical engineering culture, which is great. Yeah, I mean the balance driving the BMW and MEDC is outstanding, right? But this culture is not compatible with a 2-week development cycle sprint tech kind of mentality. It's different, right? Like, so these things are clashing, right? At Byton, we try to build a balance between these two, and have them on the same level, But in a big existing car company where you have 10, 15,000 traditional engineers, it's impossible, You hire a few thousand software engineers, they will only always be second priority, right. So you have to give them small pockets of innovation, spin it off, make a firewall with your main innovation, empower them to do something, maybe even launch a new brand. But I think you have to try to work in a new mode. And of course, you need to be all in on the supply chain of the electric battery, right? And try to get a cost competitive one, Not as relevant maybe for the premium brands, but for Volkswagen, that's the road to survival, right? To get a cost competitive battery. And I think that's and you need attitude-wise, I think it's important to recognize that you're in deep crisis mode, because we're in a situation of Kodak, where they still have a board meeting and convince themselves everything is fine and there will always be people doing analog photography. So we are already at that point of time. You need to take a radical step, not just, okay, let's go on, let's continue to watch. They've watched now for 5, 6, 7 years. It's 5 to 12, in my view.
Well, before you finish, Daniel, and then on to Tule, but does that also mean we have to get rid of the Bloomers and the Zipses and these guys and get IT software type entrepreneurs to the top of these organizations, just like a William Li or a Li Xiang or a He Xiaopeng, that actually come from that kind of background? Is that a prerequisite to really having a chance to succeed?
I wouldn't dare to comment on these guys, but on this right, 3 Chinese guys, which you mentioned, Li Xiang and William Li and He Xiaopeng, these are amazing guys who build software internet companies, and they run their company with this mindset, and to my view, very successful, right? So this is really, they are not over the mountain yet, these startups. All of them still have a long way to go because they haven't reached economies of scale. But their in-car experience, their customer experience, their innovative business model, it's really disrupting the industry. So it's very good. So actually, I think as a CEO of one of these German companies, no matter who you are, you just need to recognize that, and be open and challenge yourself. And then if you, for example, if you create these pockets of innovation, maybe you set up a couple of startup organizations, you take your best people, you give them this freedom to do. Because in all of these organizations, don't get me wrong, they are excellent people, some of the best people there are. It's just sometimes this organization has to be. Give them this chance, and then you need to have the unconditional support of your CEO. So to empower these companies, to have a firewall, to let them do and let them run, and not let the system shut them down. So you need someone who is very strongly driving this transformation and empowering the people for innovation and for change. So I think this is very important. You can't run the business in a bureaucracy as usual.
Okay, Tule, your take?
So I agree with mostly everything Daniel said, and I don't assume to know the capabilities of the leadership. I do know from a Mary Barra standpoint, Jim Farley's standpoint, they're communicating the right thing. Okay, but to Daniel's point, these companies are in the eye of the storm, the eye of the tornado, and so there can't be committees, there can't be 6 or 8 week decision-making processes. There needs to be changes, and remember that it's mostly the same leadership that sailed them into the eye of the storm. So can you believe that the people that got you in the storm can get you out? Maybe at the very top they stay, but there needs to be a lot more turnover with people with tech backgrounds. And it's not only the backgrounds, but giving them that capability, as Daniel said, to make decisions. Okay, so here's a quick kind of ratio. I think 90% of engineers at most of these legacies are traditional automotive engineers. Maybe 10% are software engineers. At a tech startup like a Neo or a Byton, I'm sure, Dan, you can confirm this. It's opposite. 70-80% are software engineers, and 20-30% are traditional automotive engineers. And so that's where, because it's not about what's happening now, it's about preparing the company for the future. And every single automotive legacy CEO or startup CEO is saying one thing consistently: services will be a larger part of our revenue in the future. In 2035, 25, 30, 40% of our revenue will come from services. And that's driven by the software dev teams, right? So my question would be to these leaderships, okay, we all know what a costed bill of materials is, okay? In the traditional automotive space, it's a bunch of parts and the number of quantities, the part number, and then how much that part costs. On a BOM, where does software development cost fit? Because that should be accounted for as a product cost, not as an indirect cost. So these are kind of like shaping how the company views things to move to the digital. Okay. And so I think that, the Inflation Reduction Act protects the US market for a few years. But if, as a consumer, if GM or Ford can't build an affordable, attractive, feature-rich, aggressively priced electric vehicle, I want to be able to choose a non-US product, right? And so this is giving them an opportunity to develop that, okay? And I think, at least in the United States, the last thing I'll say is the Biden administration is, when he's saying that we're going to catch up, we're going to overtake, they're chasing a ghost, right? Because China has been the number one global EV or the global market since 2009. 22 million cars last year. The United States had 14. We'll never catch up from a quantity standpoint. But this is where Daniel and I completely agree. We need to lean into the innovation side, right? We need to be more competitive. We'll probably never overtake China on pricing of commodities or parts or systems. But if we can be competitive, then we're in the game. Then in the future, people have a choice, right? As opposed to only being a China supply chain for batteries right now. So
that's a very good answer. I would like to come back to your economist title there that you designed for us, because you said we come in peace, right? And so you guys just talked about for a bit about sort of the rising exports of these Chinese EVs globally, right? And the couple of questions that come to mind, and maybe we can address a few of those. First, we talked about BYD, and I think they exported so far 2,600 cars to Germany this year, 2,000 alone in August, if I remember this correctly. And also with respect to the sort of the brains and minds that they have, they hired 30,000 people this year alone, and 80% of those are going into research and development. They have already 90,000 people working just in research and development. And so this is creating the product that's now being shipped in massive amounts. And we haven't even started yet, really. We're just at the beginning. And so the question really for me is like, what do you make of it? Like, what is that going to create in those markets, let's say Europe or the US, or maybe the US less so, but let's say Europe for that matter, in terms of consumer sentiment, also sort of political sentiment? Is there going to be a backlash? What are the lobbying groups gonna do about it? I sort of keep thinking back to the 80s when the German car OEM brands came to China, and they had to do joint ventures and they had to do technology transfers and that kind of stuff. Do you guys feel there's something like that in the making again, just to sort of control the inflow of Chinese cars? What do you guys make of it?
Tula, you want to
I'll
go
let
first?
Daniel start. No, you start because I'm going to change my answer based on what you say, Daniel.
But isn't that irony of history, right? Like in the 80s, totally. This Chinese joint venture story was created, and everyone had to do a joint venture, terrible pain, right? And do localization and so on. And this industry policy, the Chinese government, I think, somehow assessed that this wasn't very successful, because despite China learned how to produce and they learned how to build a good supply chain, right? And all the supplier came over, we have to acknowledge that work, and they learned how to sell, but this didn't help them really to learn how to engineer a good car, right? Because it was just taking cars from outside of China to China. And for many years in the gasoline age, the Chinese brands that stayed at the low end and low pricing and were not really able also globally to get through, right? And then out of this kind of feeling of failure in comparison to Japan and Korea, they started this industry policy promoting electric age, right? And they said, now this is, we're leapfrogging, yeah? We're going global, yeah? We want to take global leadership, right? And more than 10 years ago. So wouldn't it be crazy now if, as a reaction, Europe would come up with some tariffs or requirements as a response? So yeah, I don't know. I don't think the German industry would be wise to lobby that the European Union comes up with import duties or other requirements, because all these German companies, still more than 1/3 of their sales is in China. They rely on that, and I mean, anything be done here to really obviously block Chinese cars into European market, there would be a counteraction on the Chinese side. So that's not wise to do. Secondly, I also think, to be honest, despite we are convinced this Chinese age is coming, but it's so far the sales in Europe is quite low. It's just 1% or so, or 1.5%. So it's a bit hyped right now. So we haven't seen really the sales go through the roof. And to be honest, for the Chinese companies to really successfully enter Europe, it's still a long road. In terms of brand building, in terms of building great service, connecting with the consumer, building up a good sales distribution kind of system, which is innovative, digital, and so on. This is not an easy thing to do. So it will take some time. So we won't see the jump immediately to 1 or 2 million cars, the Chinese cars in Europe. European market is 11 million, not as big as North American market, but also quite sizable. But I think in the midterm, if we talk about 2030 plus, the Chinese cars can take easily 20-25% in Europe, the Chinese EVs. So I believe in this use potential, but it takes some time, and I don't think there will be something very radical, but maybe something on the batteries, like where you need to have more technology and there are more safety standards for the cars to make it more difficult and so on. That's my current take on it. Tule, what do you think?
So I think that it's important to remember that despite the joint venture requirements from China early on in 35, 40 years ago, every foreign automaker went all in anyways, right? So they saw this opportunity. Number two, Volkswagen, Mercedes, Audi, you name it, European car makers, they mostly do not become who they are, leading, or specifically Volkswagen Group, they don't sell 10 million without China, right? So China helped them become who they are, okay? So let's not forget that. They weren't the global automaker they were before, and China allowed them to become that. Now, I think we all agree that there's some own goals that got them to this point. But I also am in fully agreement with Daniel that in order to be successful long-term in Europe, the EU, and the United States, you have to build locally, okay? They're going to ship thousands of cars a month just to create that awareness, just to build that brand. But there's two emotional buys in a person's life. That's a house and a car. And so we all have children. I can buy an iPhone, lose it tomorrow, go back to the Apple store and buy another one. It'll hurt my pocketbook, but I won't think twice about it. The average consumer in China spends about 40 hours of research online and offline before they purchase a vehicle. And so there's a psychology to it. And to Daniel's point, it's going to take time because our children are going to be in the back seat of that Chinese EV, and it might be safe, but you have to build that trust with me before I'm going to spend that 50,000 euro to purchase that product. And so again, this is where the foreign legacies or the legacies in Europe can really exploit the current positioning they have, but just slot in their electric vehicles to that positioning and really try to protect and even grow, because the slower moving legacies will lose out that share. Somebody's got to fill it, right? Somebody's got to fill it. It's either going to be a Chinese EV or another foreign brand or a European brand. And the difference between a Europe, United States, and China is still growing. Not as fast as it was the passenger vehicle market, but in the United States and Europe, it's pretty mature. It's not going to get past 11, 12 million units ever anymore. I don't believe in Europe anyways. And so in order to grow, you have to take share from somebody. And that's going to cost a lot. Customer acquisition costs are going to be very high for the Chinese EVs if the Europeans can put products and competitive products, aggressively priced products on the road. So there's an ability for the foreign or the legacies to really still do well in Europe and the United States, especially if the Chinese are slow to move and try to take advantage of some of these things. Because Daniel, you see this too. Some of the Chinese EV companies are pricing their products pretty high for the European market. And I think that's a huge mistake, but an opportunity for the legacies. And the one company that I think is particularly at risk is Volkswagen Group, just because of the number of brands that they have. Mercedes has 2-3 brands, BMW has 2-3 brands, so it's much cleaner. Okay, but Daniel, the last thing I'll leave with you is that the legacies always believe in the different brands within the portfolio, but from a tech company, the front end and the back end is the same. The software is the same. Okay. How do you differentiate from customer engagement, from creating that premium experience that Audi has, that Porsche has, while taking advantage of the same back-end software system that Volkswagen will use, right? I think those are the types of challenges that will help them create that scale that they haven't been able to figure out yet. So,
one question, because both of you touched on it, and I would like to hear your take on some of the branding efforts that have been made by Chinese EVs. And Daniel, I remember you said this so many times back in the Beijinger days that Beijinger was born as a global brand. Many Chinese brands aren't. They were just really born for a domestic market, and you can tell this just from some of the names, right? I mean, BYD, they came around, they started with BYD, right? Like 3 Chinese characters. But then look at He Xiaopeng, calls commonly Xiaopeng, right? Like Xpeng. I mean, just in a German context, this is a terrible brand, right? I mean, just for you to like Peng in German is like even something small explodes, right? Like a little balloon is a girl, like a boy would say, oh, Peng, right? Like Xpeng. It's like for a car, it's not a good like mental association, right? So maybe it's a bit of a silly example, but what I mean is, like, how much do you think these up and coming Chinese EV brands have to spend on their branding, really, or do they have to actually rebrand in some of the cases to come into this market to get closer to their local customers here and have these customers understand what this brand is all about? Or can you actually, to go back to this one example I make, can they make it as Xpeng? What do you guys think on that?
Let me start with this one, Daniel. I think that they need to learn how to sell in foreign markets, because in China, the digital experience reigns supreme. Everyone uses WeChat, and so creating a social media presence is a no-brainer. In Europe and the United States, it's a lot different. In the United States, at least, the dealers really, really control a lot of the sales experience. And so, that's where the European market is much more complex than the United States because there's 27, 28, 29 countries, different languages, different cultures, different use cases that they need to understand and then create a strategy to try to exploit or at least build the brand. And a lot of it is going to be through promotion and product placement, because the digital experience in Europe and the United States is much less mature in Europe and the United States than it is in China. So when I say they need to learn how to sell, that's what I mean. And so they're going to have to rely a lot more. And the three of us know that the Chinese are not going to rely, or they're not going to trust any agent so quickly unless they have strong Chinese ties. And so these agencies that want to help these Chinese companies, they're going to vet them very, very, very carefully. So I think, Daniel, you have this great relationship with a lot of the Chinese automotive space. And so I think that's your opportunity with Noyo to be a great advocate for the products. And so, but outside of that, I think just kind of, they know that it's going to take time. I think if you talk to any of the CEOs, they'll tell you that it's going to take time. Unfortunately, and this is where the pressure comes in, the NIOs, the Yattos, and Xpungs at least, and BYD, they're publicly traded in Hong Kong, but they have external investors now, okay?
Right.
And when you take other people's money, they start expecting things.
Quick returns.
So so how patient they're going to be is still up for debate, but I'd love to hear Daniel's perspective. So,
no, I think you're very right. Like, I think branding, of course, is my big passion, and it's a big challenge, right? Because no one is sitting here and saying we need a new brand, right? So we are already over flooded. Huh? So what can you? So I think all these traditional ways of building brand with spending millions for traditional advertising campaign, these times are also over, in Europe, right? So you need to connect with your customer. Beijinger, of course, is a failure. We didn't make it in the end, but one thing we did right and we did well is building this brand without spending a lot of money and connecting to your consumers and fans, right? So, and we invited some people who loved this idea to be co-creators and fans, right? And they spread a word of mouth and they built an incredible power, right? So this is my view. Any new brand entering a market, you need to find your early adopters first. And it might be a small group of people, but make these people your hardcore fans. These are your advocates. Yeah? And it's better to have 10 hardcore fans than maybe 100 people who think, okay, this is a nice brand. Yeah? The hardcore fan will really help you to find this is your soul, right? And your heart of your brand. Huh? And this will help you a lot. So you need to build around that. And I think, like you said, it's a long road to build a brand. In Europe, the customers are much more rational, right? So part of building great service experience, customer experience, at all touch points. This is building your brand, the credibility, right? And then just simply getting the product experience, right? People just reading about it, hearing about it doesn't help. So you need to go into places, just put it there, let people sit inside, let them drive with it, and create a word of mouth, And I think it's very important to be genuine, to have a true kind of soul, not to be fake. And the people want to know, these Chinese brands, what do they stand for? What is their story? How does it connect with me? So, and it needs to be genuine and true. And there's 20 more brands coming to Europe. Do you think a normal consumer will be able to sort all of that out? Yeah, I don't think so. But right now, in Europe, it's amazing. All these people who are buying the Teslas right now, right? The ones which no one expected a few years ago. All these guys buying a Model 3, Model Y. So they are buying a car for around 50,000 euros. And all of these guys saying, okay, I buy a Tesla. It's basically the only choice. There's no choice. Yeah. But in their mind, there's room for another choice. Yeah. And they got it already in Europe that China is doing something right on the EV side. So they are open to try out a new brand. So there's a chance for 1, 2, 3 of these Chinese entrants to cover this Chinese Tesla position on the consumer mind, and be a different choice. I wouldn't dare to say it's necessarily a better choice because Tesla is doing great, but just to be another choice, be maybe better in one or the other area or even more cost competitive. So I think this is something, there's a window of opportunity right now for the Chinese brand. And I don't think it's just BYD. There's at least 4 or 5 other guys who can have this chance. And the one thing where I'm so convinced this is the true game changer, and I like to hear your view on this, Tula, as well. Who is ultimately gonna sell the 25,000 euro EV, right? I mean, for normal people in Europe who buy a Polo or a Volkswagen Golf right now, I mean, if they want to buy an EV, I mean, either they need to be crazy ideologists, and pay a price premium of 50 or 70%, or they just get a product which is really crappy at this price point. Yeah. So, and everyone is talking about this, right? Volkswagen is saying it. Tesla has been promising it for years. I know that there's at least 4 or 5 Chinese companies who have a great car which can reach European quality, maybe below 25,000 euros. So this is gonna be the real brand of the winner. I mean, who's gonna be maybe the new leader, the ones who are gonna credibly bring over this product. So who do you think this is gonna be, Tula? Do you think it's Tesla, or will it be one of the Chinese players, or even Volkswagen?
So the reality is that Tesla and BYD are head and shoulders above every other EV maker. And so BYD is already building really affordable, competitive vehicles. Now, the user experience is lagging versus some of their competitors, but I think everything else, because they're able to sell a couple 100,000 units a month in China, they've reached that economies of scale. And so they have a lot of flexibility. And they've come out with the Seagull, which is $11,000 in China. And I think what they're looking to do is move into sodium ion with the Seagull so that it can put the price down below $10,000, which would be a perfect vehicle for Southeast Asia, for Latin America, for Africa. That is very affordable, right? And this is where the traditional automotive space still reigns supreme. It takes economies of scale to really push that profitability. But I'll say this, Daniel and Mirko, regardless of how controversial Tesla is or Elon is, if he was to build a 25,000 euro Model 2 and it had similar features to the 3 and the Y, I think Berlin Giga would be at capacity within 18 months. And that's also where they're head and shoulders above everyone else. Now, in the markets where Tesla and BYD will compete directly at that $25,000 price point, I think it'll be a fun competition and a lot of fireworks to see. But I see it. Let me put it another way. A foreign legacy or a legacy automaker, I think it'd be very, very difficult for them to reconcile a $25,000 euro vehicle that's feature rich without making sacrifices somewhere else. And I think Americans and Europeans are too savvy of consumers to really take or purchase a product that they know is lacking in 1 or 2 areas. So that's the real challenge, because if the average price point of a U.S. passenger vehicle is about $48,000. So in order to get to 25, 30, 40% take rate for EVs in the United States, we need to have a lot of products under $48,000, not just 1 or 2, because to your point, we want choice. And if there's a $30,000 ICE, I'm going to buy that instead of the EV that's $45,000. So it's a simple math equation, and it creates opportunities for the incumbents. It creates opportunities for new brands, because now Magnastire and Foxconn can help us bring a product to market or an EV to market much cheaper than in the Byton days where you needed to still buy a factory for the most part. And so So that's where I'm super optimistic that there will be emerging European, American, and even more Chinese companies that are going to come out that push the envelope on that price and feature intersection. So,
very good.
We're coming up on an hour, guys. I think we'll need to wrap up soon, but I think we need to cover a little bit geopolitics, as much as we don't want to. But it just came up the last couple of days. You guys have seen the news with the Apple iPhone. Central government employees, officials are not allowed to have one anymore. It just got extended now to local governments as well, and even state-owned enterprises. We all know that the Teslas are not allowed to enter any sort of government premises anymore. With all of that going on, what do you guys make of that? And is this something that is likely going to be met even in Europe or the US with some countermeasures where, government people, and not that we have that many state-owned companies, well, we don't have any, but then they're not allowed to enter those government compounds and premises anymore. And what do you make of that? Is that going to get worse? And where do you see that lead? I mean, it's a terrible time, as we all know. We spent such a long time in China, and so much has happened in the last 3 years, and these things seem to be piling up on each other, and it's very annoying. But I think it's kind of like here to stay with us. Or what's your take on that?
So at least for the United States, 2024 is going to be an election year, so it's very popular on both sides to bash China. Now, that the iPhone thing is very very eye-opening, because we also know that Apple employs, via their contract manufacturers, millions of Chinese employees. So it tells me that the Chinese government in certain instances is willing to cut its nose off to spite its face a little bit to make these bans like that. But I also think that they feel, and I think this is important, they feel that they're retaliating against some of the things that the United States government has done, with the chips and the silicon and things like that. And I think, unfortunately, we might not get to the bottom until after the 2024 election, where the new president looks at the global market and global economy and says, okay, we have to work together on these things. So how do we cooperate? And it is unfortunate. But for now, the Chinese government knows it still needs Tesla in China, because I'd mentioned earlier, it's basically BYD and Tesla and everybody else. If we take Tesla out of that equation, I don't know if BYD as a brand can support the entire EV sector in China. I'd love to hear Daniel's input on that. But Tesla is I
agree. I agree. Just with the precondition that they don't continue to cut the prices further, right? Because this is damaging all the Chinese companies. Yeah.
Yes. So. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. I think that it might even get more political as more capacity for battery cells is added in Europe, because currently there's Northvolt that has announced gigafactories, but British Volt blew up. So I don't know. And you please educate me. Are there any European battery startups that have significant IP that could make a difference in the battery supply chain? I mean, this is not the question that you asked, Mirko, but I'm a nerd, so I'm just trying to figure out if there's any companies that I'm not aware of in Europe that are making inroads into the battery space. So,
Daniel has been in the space, huh?
Yeah, I'm also not a super battery expert, but I know, of course, there's a huge number of gigafactories under construction, right? And it's getting traction, some independent, some from the manufacturers, some joint ventures and so on. But like you said, the keyword is the IP, and the go-to market for a battery is even longer than for a car startup, right? So there could be a window for Chinese battery companies to enter Europe in a cooperation with some of these new players, because many of the new players in Europe, they need access to good IP, because this will shorten their time to market. And Yeah, and coming back to your question, Mirko, I think I hope that we see a stop of this negative spiral, right, of relations, which always have an action, counter action, and so on. I think Chinese EVs are a highlight of Chinese economy right now, which is not doing that well right now. So at least for Europe and for the rest of the world, this can be a success story. I would love to see Chinese EVs going to the US, right? Like right now, I mean, just from a consumer perspective, nothing political or whatever. I mean, it's just a great products with great choice, and American market consumers, they're very, let's say, savvy, and they will choose the best product. So it's great. I mean, in order to go global, but it's a pity right now. Of course, no Chinese EV maker is daring to enter the market. Yeah, I hope this happens soon. Yeah. So, Tule, what would be your guess when we?
So let me correct you on that, Daniel. So GM is currently building a Buick in Shanghai that's getting shipped to the US, and Polestar, the Polestar 2, ships from China to the US. So that door has been open. But it's again,
possible, right? I agree, but these are not the real genuine Chinese brands, right? I know, like 10 years ago, there's companies in China like Guangzhou Automotive, at that time still a gasoline car. They had a plan to enter the US. And I guess that NIO, Xiaopeng, all these guys, I mean, going forward, they would love to sell in the US. But I think due to geopolitical tensions and US-China relations, no one dares to do that at this point of time. Despite, I think, the consumer, they would welcome this.
Thank you, guys. Please wrap up. Tule, your last words on the topic, NIO in the US, welcome or not?
Oh, I think that there's this fine balance between trying to become a leader without hiring local employees to help you build. Literally and figuratively. I think that once they come in and they show a commitment to the U.S., the employees and things like that, I think that's going to be very, very, very important. I also think that after 2024, we'll see a number of Chinese EV brands. Daniel, you and I speak to a lot of these brands pretty regularly, and so their eyes are wide open about the United States. They know the realities, but they also have a lot of ambition. Okay, I don't think that Elon is the only one that has global ambitions for Tesla. I think Wang Chuanfu is very, very ambitious. Stella Li, very, very ambitious. Li Bin, super ambitious. And then you cannot be quote unquote global if you're not selling in the United States, in my opinion.
That's right. That's right.
But I also think that it's a great time if you're someone like me or Daniel to be in the space, because although we spend a lot of time in China, our roots and our foundations are in Germany and the United States. And so having both perspectives creates a balance that I don't think most other business people or even car people have. I think it's very important in moving the sector forward. And I'm just a fan. I'm just grabbing my popcorn and eating and seeing all the moves, because as you both know, man, it's not just the automotive space. There's so many things that happen every week. It's just so difficult and challenging to keep up with the China market on a lot of different sectors. So we do our best, but yeah, man, it is always something new.
I think we're ending on a great positive vibe here now. It's awesome, and actually almost like the invitation for our next get together, because as you said, there's so many things happening. It's hard to catch up. I think this is a great forum to really sort of share some insights, things we've seen, we've heard, we've read, and trying to make sense of it. We all love China, spent such a long time there, and I think this was an awesome setup. Thank you, both of you, for sharing your insights. And let's see what our viewers are saying when they want to see a repeat of this little get together. But again, thank you guys for being on the show today.
Mirko, Daniel, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tula, for making it. It was amazing to have you here.
Yeah, it's a good chat.
Yeah.